What we left up last time was Ananda was responsible for helping to bring in 500 women into the Sangha, into the order to form the orders of the nuns. And where we left off was on the sutra of Nandaka. Nandaka was invited by the Buddha to preach to the 500 nuns and Mahaprajapati, who was the foster mother of Prince Siddhartha. And so where we left off last time, well, he was preaching to these women about truth. And the first thing he asked them was to be truthful in their responses when he asked them whether they understood him or not. And so he asked them of the 6 senses, whether they are constant or inconstant. And they said that it's inconstant because the eyes, the senses change. And so he was leading them to the truth that he was trying to show them. And where we talked about that because of impermanence, things are impermanent, and because things are of no self. And when we try to seek the self out of the things that we have at hand, it will lead to stress and dissatisfaction. Because they are meant to change, but we're preventing them from changing. We're trying to control them. We're trying to make those things as our own. It will lead us to dissatisfaction. So that's the first thing. So this is helping us to understand conditionality. In other words, we should have the right expectation. When we have something, we should have the right expectation and not to be fooled by their appearances. And that will help us to have the right view. So one side you have the 6 senses, and then the other side you have the external phenomena. And they are forms, sounds, aromas, flavors, tactile, mental phenomena corresponding to your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your taste, and your touch, your body, and your mental faculty. And he also asked whether these are constant or inconstant. For example, just take an example like flavor. Flavor is, when we say we enjoy flavor, it's not really that the flavors are enjoyable, but we're trying to, it's based on our perceptions. And when we eat something of our favorite food, and we have the thinking of wanting to taste that flavor again, we are trying to relive the past, or we're trying to live in our imagination. In other words, we're trying to reproduce the same type of enjoyment, the experience that we had before. And that enjoyment is living in the past because we're reminded. So the things that we enjoy are not necessarily because they are enjoyable, but because of our perceptions and our past experience or our imagination. And we notice that it's not the same experience. You may be the same, you may try to reproduce it, but it's never the same. For example, like your coffee or whatever that you enjoy, or your favorite coffee shop or your bookshop or your clothing, whatever that you enjoy in the past. And some people try to do that. They try to relive that by wearing the same type of clothes that they enjoyed when they were at their heights, when they were in their prime. And so they were trying to relive that, and it's not the same. Your thinking is not the same anymore. The situations are no longer the same. Therefore, the total experience, the resultant of the experience is not the same. And so when we fall into a trap is when we think that we can live and reproduce the past. And that's what he's trying to explain here, is that even our flavor, things that we enjoy, the smell, the fragrance that we enjoy will not be the same. And so when we have these ideas that things are constant and that they belong to us, then that's when we produce stress for ourselves. And therefore, it's not fitting to regard what is constant, as mine, as myself. Although this may sound really simple, but we do this to ourselves all the time, unconsciously. And that's what leads to dissatisfaction, anger. That's why we have anger. That's why we have craving, because we don't understand that deep down in our consciousness that we are doing this to ourselves, that we don't truly recognize. Deep down inside, we still want those things to be constant. So if we expect the six phenomena, these six phenomena here to be constant, that we want to have control of them, then we are setting ourselves up for dissatisfaction. So we have to understand that it doesn't mean that there is no satisfaction. It's just that the satisfaction has to be substantiated with a lot of criteria. If we want to enjoy the sounds or the aromas or the flavors, there are so many conditions in order to produce that wonderful experience. For example, if you want to enjoy your favorite food, first of all, your body has to be in good health. You need to have that appetite. And then secondly, that there's got to be a cook who can make the food that you like, the flavor that you like, and that you have the taste buds to receive those flavors. So you can see that every experience that we have requires so many conditions, and for us to want to have that experience to be the same every time is not realistic. So it doesn't mean that we should not enjoy, but it means that we should have the right expectation. So this comes down to expectation management. When we are dealing with something that are inconstant, that are forever changing, we should understand what conditions are required to have the right result. So if we don't have the right expectations, then it will lead to dissatisfaction. So if we want to avoid disappointment, avoid mental stress, we should have the right expectations. And that's what Nandaka said here, is that's how it is for a disciple of the noble ones who has seen it as it actually is, with right discernment, with right view. So here he's not saying that the world is terrible, there's always suffering. No, there is suffering because we don't have the right expectation. We don't have the right view. That's why it is suffering. So when you have your sixth consciousness, and so Nandaka is moving on to the next level, when you have the six senses with the six phenomena together with attention, you produce six consciousnesses. And they belong to, you have the consciousness of the eyes, or the sight, really sight, the hearing, the tasting, or the smelling, the tasting, and the touch. For example, like the eyes consciousness he gave as an example, it's not constant either. Right? It's because the senses are inconstant, the phenomena, external phenomena, or the phenomena are inconstant, therefore, the result, your experience, your consciousness is also inconstant, including your mind. Your mind is forever changing. So when we see something, we can be fooled if we don't understand that what we're seeing is not reality, because there is greed behind it, right? There is self-centeredness behind it. And that's why even though we see something, it doesn't mean that we're seeing the truth, because we are being influenced by the negative factors. So when we have impermanent senses combined with impermanent Dhamma or phenomena, then we will have impermanent consciousnesses. And that leads to impermanent experiences. That's why our joy, our suffering, or even indifferent feelings, they are impermanent. So we should not take our feelings to be permanent. Some people, they don't understand that. They say, this is who I am. This is how I feel. And so they base their lives on feelings. When we feel sad or discouraged, it is not forever. We will feel happy again, when we're not careful, then that happy feeling will be replaced by sadness. And for example, like depressed people, they harbor extreme view by thinking that their feelings, their state of being is permanent, is forever. And therefore, they cannot get out of that state of depression. And therefore, what we should do is, we know the world is very turbulent. On the outside, when we interact with the world, our minds are turbulent, our feelings are turbulent. So we should sink down to the bottom of the sea of our serenity, the ocean of serenity, where it is less turbulent. The bottom is more calm and more serene. So we know, for example, we may be busy cultivating merits, but deep down inside, we are serene. So we should remind ourselves, sometimes it helps to bring ourselves back to reality by understanding that things are impermanent. Our feelings are impermanent. Votu, right? Our consciousness, our experiences are impermanent. And sometimes if we don't have awareness, we can be caught as surprised at the negative state that we're in. This is kind of like being sick or being ill. If you notice, you can treat your flu, for example, very quickly, and you can avoid the pain and the headache. For example, when you have contracted a virus, you will have a little bit of sore throat, and you might not notice. But if you don't treat it immediately, then that sore throat becomes more and more severe. Or you have all of a sudden, throughout the whole day, maybe like during lunchtime, all of a sudden you feel like there's a muscle ache. Your muscle, you don't feel right. But because you don't pay attention to the body to take care of it, and you allow it to fatigue even more. And by the end of the day, now you start to feel more fatigue, and you think that, maybe because a difficult day at work that you feel fatigue. But little did you know that your body has contracted virus, and it becoming even more sick. And so over the night, and then the next morning, then now that virus has fully developed, and now your illness is now coming to fruition. So just like that, when we see something, we have that catch in our eyes, I like that thing. So we have already planted a seed. And if we're not careful, that seed, and you continue to look at it, you are reinforcing it, and therefore you are providing conditions the seed to grow into fruit. And so that craving becomes more and more, or that hatred becomes more and more. So when we understand that our experiences are indifferent, we can revert. So our hatred against a certain person is not permanent, but because we think that our feelings, our negative feelings are permanent, we are justified to be angry. Then that anger will develop into hatred and unskillfulness. So Nandaka gave very beautiful examples to make this, to illustrate this clearly, to bring this home. He said like a candle. The oil in the burning lamp is inconstant and is subject to change. The wick is also inconstant. And so the oil is inconstant, the wick is inconstant, and therefore the flame is inconstant. The light is inconstant, and it is subject to change. But if we don't understand that, and we think that light is constant, then that is not speaking rightly. So in the same way, our 6 external media are inconstant. But what I experience, pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, is constant, then that is speaking not speaking rightly. That means that we should have awareness in our experiences, our feelings, in order to detect the impermanence. So when feeling arises, it is dependent on condition. So when the conditions are there, When the things that you don't like are there, and in the same time your heart is also filled with anger, then or dissatisfaction, then that is pouring oil in fire, and that will create flame. Or like the tree parable, where the root is subject to change, the trunk is also subject to change, the branches and so forth, the leaves are also subject to change. But if we don't understand that, we will think that the shadow is constant, everlasting. So again, our experiences, pain, pleasure, or indifference, is also subject to change. And to see them constant is not to see reality. So we should not be fooled by our emotions. We should understand our emotions and recognize our emotions, and that we don't get caught up in the fluctuations, but we should rather sink to the bottom of our serenity in order to avoid turbulence. And he also gave a cow parable, where a person taking a cow, chopping up, carving out the skin, the inner flesh, but if you were to put together, then it's not the same thing. So our experiences that we have, we cannot recreate. We cannot try to take all the conditions, the different conditions now at different times, try to recreate that experience. That is to try to live in the past, try to live in our imagination. So the message here is that our senses and the phenomena together, they provide consciousness, which create our experiences, but they are inconstant. So the parable, using the knife to cut off the flesh, represents a noble discernment, right view, 正见, right? 智慧, trí tuệ, chánh kiến. And that is to sever the defilements, the fetters and the bonds that ties us to the samsara. And he talked about the 7 factors, how the 7 factors are the tools how to sharpen the knife so that you can see things clearly, so that you can cut away the fetters and bonds that keep you within the cycle of life and death. And those 7 factors are mindfulness, analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, serenity, concentration, equanimity. And those will lead to awakening dependent on seclusion. It leads to seclusion, it leads to dispassion, cessation, and relinquishment. So these terms in Theravada, they sound negative, but you can see that up to this point here, it is all positive. But when these terms here trying to illustrate is that the states that you achieve after concentration are even more positive. So these may sound very negative, but they are extremely positive. For example, mindfulness. Let's take mindfulness. So the first thing is to be mindful of our feelings, mindfulness. And mindfulness here is the balancing factor. Without mindfulness, you will end up in one of the extremes. So mindfulness is very important. Mindfulness is what helps us keep in balance between our wisdom and faith. Wisdom alone or intelligence alone without faith is just worldly intellect. And there's no devotion. You may be a very smart person, but there is no devotion. You're not changing your behavior. You're not convinced really on the things that you have learned. But faith alone will lead to blindness, right? Spiritual blindness, or emotional, the balance between being emotional and intellectual. So mindfulness is that balance, allows us to be emotional, to express ourselves emotionally, but at the same time maintain our intellect. This helps us to bring us back to a sense of proportion. Sometimes we may have more faith than intellect, but there is a balancing factor. At work, we often talk about work-life balance, right? Work-life balance doesn't mean that 50% of the time work, 50% of time, your own life. But it could be 732, depends on, you have more weight on the other. So balance here doesn't mean exactly in the middle, but whatever is balanced for you, that is balance for you. So mindfulness here helps us to maintain that balance. It helps us to equalize our worldly and spiritual aspect of our lives. And this is what is needed in order to achieve concentration. So the next level up with mindfulness, you will have this investigation of the nature of reality, this investigative mind. So mindfulness here, when it leads to concentration, it doesn't mean that you know nothing, but first, with mindfulness, you start to have acute awareness of the things around you. You'll be able to differentiate between what's wrong and what's right, what's true and what's false. And you just don't blindly accept because you understand things very clearly. And with the right understandings of the principles, it helps you to maintain your efforts. If you only have faith but no wisdom, then it's going to be difficult when you encounter difficulties to continue on your journey, because you don't have the principles of justifying why things happen. You believe that the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas will be there to help you. But when you encounter difficulties, and it may seem like you have no help, but you have no understanding of the principle, and it is very difficult for you to push through that barrier. And that's why learning the principles is is very important, right? So we should ask ourselves, why do we want to study Buddhism? What do we want to pursue when we meditate, for example? What is it that we're trying to get out of it? If we don't have the proper understanding, and we know only about great bliss, we know about supreme joy, meditative bliss, then we don't really have a strong root in our journey, because meditative bliss has nothing to do with extinguishing the ego, eradicating our craving. So when we want to migrate to the Western Pure Land, it is not just about joy. Even though joy is an important factor, because that's what gives you the inspiration, gives you the energy to move you forward towards a Western Pure Land. But behind that movement, there should be something else even more powerful to push you forward. And that is the elimination of the ego, right? When we eliminating our craving, when we can eliminate the ego, can eliminate our craving, and we have this faith, this joyful faith pushing us forward, then it is ever more powerful. Because if we don't understand the principle to eliminate our ego and our craving, then when we face difficulties, we will give up. Because it's too much to bear, and that it will lead to dissatisfaction because there is still an egoistic drive behind that, wanting to be in the Western Pure Land, wanting to have that meditative joy. So the more meditative joy that we have, in fact, it increases our ego. And it makes us more egoistic. It makes us more arrogant if we achieve what we achieve. So it is very important to understand why we want to study Buddhism, right? Why we want to be in the Western Pure Land. And at the same time, we have to get back to the root, and that is to eliminate the ego, the craving, and not allow the ego to control us. We may be attracted to Buddhism psychologically, but there is no spiritual development if we don't eliminate our craving, our ego. Right? Without extinguishing our ego, without eradicating our craving, then the more that we have, whether joy or what, or intellect, more wisdom that we have, the more egoistic we become. And because we become attached to meditative joy, attached to the wisdom that we uncover ourselves, and that will either lead to our view of existentialism, which means we want things to last forever, or nihilism, where we want to escape. Right? We had it with this word, we want to escape. So when we face difficulty, if we have the extreme view, we want to escape from it. And that will not allow us to develop spiritually. So after we have investigated reality clearly, then that gives us the energy, the motivation. We are now determined. And we see things clearly, what's wrong, what's right. Therefore, we have this energy and this courage to avoid unskillfulness. It is not easy to avoid unskillfulness. You can see the news recently, right, with the collapse of the cryptocurrency, all that, because they have so much money, so much funds available, that it is so difficult not to be corrupted. When you have so much funds at your disposal, and you think that you could get away with it, it is so easy for you to dive into it and to take advantage of it. So that's why it's not easy to avoid unskillfulness. It takes determination, it takes wisdom, it takes clarity in order to have the courage to avoid unskillfulness. But if we are courageous enough, then we will be able to overcome that. If we are courageous enough in our pursuit, enlightenment will come. Right? We may have challenges, but enlightenment will come. Little by little, we will be able to resolve our karmic obstructions. Like every day, it's just chipping away, right? Just practice every day. Practice giving, practice meditation day by day, little by little. It will come. If things don't go our way, and we should not give up, but we should build and maintain good relationships and cultivate, dedicate merits. The people at work, we may not have good relationships. We may have this negative vibe with them, but we should continue to think good thoughts about them, want them to be happy, to be prosperous. Little by little, a year later, maybe even it could be earlier, but a year later, you will notice that there is a change in the feelings, in the atmosphere, and things will become brighter. The relationships improve. And that is because of your dedications and your merits that you will be able to change, because things are impermanent. The negative relationships that we have with other people can change if we are willing to change it. So when we have this energy, we have cultivated skillfulness, merits, it leads to joy. So our joy is because of merits, not because that we wish, or not because of controlling other people. But the joy of rapture comes because of our merits, which comes from our skillful deeds. So if life starts going your way, based on conditions provided, it gives you self-confidence. This is very amazing. I don't know how to explain it, and I cannot prove to you, and you can only experience it yourself. But if you're in a situation where you think you lack self-confidence, don't worry about it. Put that aside. Continue to put in your best to contribute, to cultivate merits, to be helpful. Then you realize that after 3 months, 6 months, or even a year, you will realize that you have self-confidence in you. And when you have this self-confidence, of course, because of skillfulness, that you will have self-confidence in the proper way. And that will help you to reinforce yourself to continue to do good deeds, skillful deeds. And the more that you do good deeds, more merits will be cultivated. You have more self-confidence and you have more joy. So self-confidence leads to joy. This is phenomena that not only in Buddhism but in the world as well. You see people who are out there spreading bad news, for example. They may be bad actors, but they have a lot of self-confidence in them. So it's not, and that is because of the value that they have in that group, in that society. Because they have done some good, it doesn't mean it's virtuous, but they have done some good to help others, and other people are just reciprocating a receipt of his help in the past. And therefore, because of that it gives him self-confidence. But we should be mindful that if we cultivate merit without the proper mindset, meaning that without the aspiration for ultimate enlightenment, then we are just cultivating worldly karmic rewards. And the problem with that is that it's a false sense of security. The merits that we have, the joy that we have because our karmic rewards, is a false sense of security, because we continue to think that what we do is good, but in reality it is, we are depleting our merits without knowing it. So we should be mindful that when we cultivate merits, it's not about worldly enjoyment, but we should have a higher aspiration in order to prevent ourselves from being corrupted, from creating that false sense of security. When you truly have the joy because of the higher aspiration, that joy leads to relaxation. And you need this relaxation in order to contain that joy. Otherwise, that joy becomes so coarse that you cannot contain it. It becomes crazy happy almost. So this joy here, first, joy here comes from your merits because you have seen reality and that you are motivated to do it, to do good deeds, and you have the ability to avoid temptations of evil deeds. And that joy eventually, if you're willing to let go of that joy even, then it leads to relaxation, tranquility. Because you know that you're on the right path. You have a higher aspiration than just worldly enjoyment. When you have that relaxation, it leads to concentration. Concentration here is a calm, one-pointed state of mind. This is the fertile ground for supernatural ability or wisdom to grow. So meditation is very positive, it's very healthy, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Even a higher state of being than concentration is equanimity, where you accept reality as it is. This is not in a passive way. We have seen that because we know that from the basis for tranquility, right, is energy, right? It's investigations of the nature of reality. So there's wisdom behind it. So when we get to equanimity, it doesn't mean that we are in a passive state. But here we are eliminating the susceptibility of joy and non-joy. If we find ourselves very easy to be excited, to be joyful, then we know that we are just as susceptible of being depressed. So we should have that awareness that whatever that we are susceptible to one end of the spectrum, the more susceptible that we are to one end of the spectrum, then the more susceptible, likewise, that we are to the other end of this spectrum. So this equanimity is completely positive. Right? This is to avoid arrogance, to avoid self-attachment, because you're letting go of things that are mundane and coarse, and you are continue to pursue something that's higher. So there is no settling down. There's no resting our laurels. Right? We continue to make progress. Having exhorted the nuns, Venerable Nandaka dismissed them, but yet they were not completely achieved enlightenment yet. They were happy, but they have not realized the truth yet. So Buddha asked Nandaka again, to preach to the nuns once more. And the second time, they were able to achieve their state of sagehood. At least, very least, they were able to achieve the state of stream winner, right? The first fruit of sagehood. So we should keep listening. If we don't understand something, we should continue to listen so that we can absorb in our minds and that we can start to change our consciousness for it to start to take effect. So steady progress, one step at a time. In Tibetan Buddhism, they bow like 100,000 times, or they chant mantras 100,000 times, and that repetition allows us to change our consciousness. So when we do something once, we think we understand it, but what we're understanding is just, it's like the short-term memory, only you remember on the surface. But after a while, you forget because it hasn't sunk yet to the bottom of our being. So in order for us to see reality, it has to be day after day, pounding on that wall to knock away, to chip away that wall, that obstructions to see reality, right? We continue to chip away that obstruction. Eventually, the wall will break away. We may have some fracture, and we start to see some light, some rays of light shining through. Of course, we shouldn't stop there, but we continue to pound on it to break away. Just like when we sit in meditation, at the beginning is maybe uncomfortable. We have this Lego video creation class, and we try to have the kids sit together to meditate on what they want to do that day. It is so difficult to have them to sit even for 5 seconds, to sit still and not do anything. So one time we made them sit for 5 minutes. From their faces, it must have been the most excruciating experiences they've ever had. So it's not easy. So likewise, when we first sit in meditation, it is difficult, but we should continue, and then we will start to feel the calm, the serene state of being. But we shouldn't just stop there to enjoy the bliss, but the point of sitting in meditation is to uncover our wisdom, to chip away the obstruction of our consciousness, our craving, our egoistic drive that we don't normally see, but to chip away those things so that we can start to have this light of wisdom shining through, right? So it's not just sitting there enjoying meditation, but the purpose of sitting meditation is to make this ground fertile for us to grow the seed of wisdom. Because it is only with wisdom that we can change ourselves completely. With just meditation, we feel calm, but it is not permanent. Because we don't have wisdom, when we interact with the world, we change back to our old self. Only with wisdom, where our consciousness is changed, is transformed, can we elevate to the next level, and hopefully to the level of no regression, retrogression. So this may sound very simple, right? You have your senses, you have your phenomena, and together you have your consciousness. And they're impermanent. Well, it sounds very simple, but yet when we listen to this, we have not yet gained enlightenment. So what did the nuns realize that allowed them to become enlightened? So after 2 times of lecturing this, the nuns became enlightened. So what was it that they were able to realize that they could achieve enlightenment? Penetrating the truth is very difficult because you have to transcend all thoughts, and only the wise can understand that. So what the nuns realized was this conditions co-productions or conditionality. When the Buddha first realized this, he became purely transcendental. And with this insight, he had to find a way to convey this achievement. And so that was the second step where he attempted to formulate that insight in intellectual terms. And finally, apply the various concrete situations of this general formula to make it more applicable to all sentient beings. Only by bringing this doctrine home to man's business and bosoms, in this way, could he make it comprehensible to them. So only that we can make it relatable to us, that we would be able to appreciate it. And if we don't understand conditionality, we can become easily and gradually identified exclusively with one side or the other extreme. One is to escape reality. We can absorb in our meditations, and we don't want to deal with reality, to quickly escape from it. So we should have this balance to avoid extremes. So what the nuns realized was conditionality, and the conditionality allows us to avoid the extremes. So when we understand conditionality, we will have this inspiration, this motivation to maintain progress. And that's what it needs. In order to maintain progress, you need to have inspirations, you need to have this motivations. And to understand conditionality, by that, when the nuns becomes enlightened, it doesn't mean that they are transported into a different world where they are no longer anything to do with their current world. But when we understand conditionality, what does that mean anyways, to understand conditionality? To understand conditionality is to have the right expectations. It's essentially expectation management. For example, we don't understand reality when we are not realistic. We expect life to be smooth. We want to have power and money, but we don't want to have the pressure that comes with it. So it's not about happiness, but it's about the solution. Because with solution, you can resolve any problems. With solutions, you will have the right attitude and you can address the problems realistically. So for example, when we study Buddhism, we should not expect that we will have a smooth life from now on, and that we will not get sick, and that we will not die. No, there's no disaster happening, and that everything in our families will be smooth sailing. So that's not realistic, because we have this body. The body will be susceptible to the environment, and it can get sick, for example. So having the body, because of having the body, that we should accept the fact that it will come, something will come to us. This body will be affected. But we should not allow it to impact us emotionally, meaning it should not allow us to demotivate us, for us to not be inspired. So it's not about not having problems. Not having problems doesn't guarantee that you will not have suffering. For example, let's say we worry about, given the conditions today, there are people who encounter financial pressure, right? So they think that if they just had money, their problems would go away. But from their perspective, that's what they thought would be, would be suitable for them, would be that all their problems would go away if they had money. But if we look at people who had money, they didn't have, they still also had suffering and dissatisfaction. So money is not a solution to the problem, right? People seek wealth to achieve safety, to want to have safety. But wealth cannot bring safety. Even millionaires, they have no money problem, but yet they have other problems. Because the more money they have, the bigger targets that they become for attacks. So stop trying to have no problems in life. So we should stop trying to have no problems in life, but to seek solutions by understanding conditionality, have proper expectations. Right? So happiness comes from one's values and merits, not money. So when we understand conditionality, we understand the proper conditions to provide in order to achieve our goal. This is what Nandaka taught the nuns, and they were able to achieve enlightenment because they had realized conditionality. And one way for us to understand conditionality on our terms is to have proper expectations. When we are in certain situations, we should understand that there are negatives, but also positives too. So we should not focus too much on our negatives, but try to resolve our negatives, and not to get rid of the negatives, but to resolve them. So that was the relationship between Mahaprajapati and Ananda. So it was also Ananda's effort that Mahaprajapati and 500 women gained enlightenment after they had listened to Venerable Anandaka preach on conditionality. So the first time that Mahaprajapati just gained Sotapanna, the first level, and then the second time she was able to achieve arhatship. Mahaprajapati lived to be 120 years old. When she died, all of the 5 nuns also passed into parinirvana with her. And there were miracles attending Mahaprajapati's cremation. It was said that it was second only to the Buddha, so she had achieved, in a way, high spiritual attainment. Towards the end of the Buddha's life, he mentioned to Ananda that the Buddha could live for a kappa, or until the end of a kappa, if so requested, because he had achieved the 4 bases of psychic powers. And unfortunately, according to the sutra, that Ananda failed to make the request. We're kind of running out of time here. So why don't we leave this for next